Good evening. You are tuning in to AWANI Tonight with me, Cynthia Ng. Malaysia will have enough vaccine to inoculate 80% of the population by this October. And overcoming vaccine hoarding for the sake of recovery. What can wealthy nations do? That's coming up. Malaysia will have enough COVID-19 vaccine supply to inoculate 80% of the population by October this year. National COVID-19 Immunization Coordinating Minister Kari Jamaluddin explained the scheduled delivery of vaccines versus the total number of registrations.
The graph shows the projection for Malaysia's cumulative vaccine deliveries. Based on this, it is projected that the vaccine supply will be more than the demand from June onwards. He explained in a tweet stating the green line that shows the expected arrival of vaccines procured, while the yellow line shows the current progress of the registration process, and the blue line represents the National COVID-19 Immunization Program's registration target. Meanwhile, Health Minister Datuk Seri Dr. Adam Babas said almost 410,000 individuals completed both COVID-19 shots as of Monday. National athletes, including those who are representing the country for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, were among those vaccinated today. The program's second phase will kick off this week until August, involving 9.4 million senior citizens, vulnerable groups and persons with disabilities. Adham also added more than 500 staff, including doctors, nurses, medical assistants, laboratory officers and radiologists of the ministry will be mobilized to Sarawak to help contain the surge of cases in the state. Sarawak reported a record high of 607 COVID-19 cases today, followed by Selangor and Kuala Lumpur.
The COVID-19 pandemic could stretch on for years if rich countries continue to hoard vaccines. That is the biggest obstacle to recovery, according to immunopathology specialist Professor Sibrande Popema. He urges wealthy nations to donate portions of the vaccines they have purchased to low and middle income countries that have been priced out of acquiring vaccines.
And the most important thing is for the Western countries not to hoard the vaccines, but make them available to countries, like in Africa. If they don't, and that's really the biggest risk right now, if we don't make vaccines available to all countries, what will happen is that the pandemic will smolder, there will be new variants developing in those countries, and it will come back to haunt us. So really, the countries that have vaccines, and some are sitting on big piles of vaccines, they really have to share them with other countries. It's much more important to have all countries in the world vaccinated for 70% than to have some countries that are vaccinated for 100%. So let's hope that politicians will learn that and that they will not play to their home crowd, because what they really should tell their home crowd is, by doing this, we are putting you at risk for yet another pandemic.
Commenting on vaccine uniformity, Prof. Popema explains that an efficient vaccine developed anywhere in the world will work with the same efficacy elsewhere.
Okay, first of all, all the vaccines that are being used right now have been approved in different countries. In some cases, they have not approved or not even asked for approval in some countries, mostly for political reasons. But what we know, and all the facts are there, that all of these vaccines that have been approved are working. So the Russian vaccine is working fine. The Chinese vaccines are working fine. The American vaccines, basically Pfizer is not an American, it's a German vaccine. Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not an American vaccine, it's a Dutch vaccine. But all of these vaccines work fine. They prevent that people get seriously sick. So that's what they all do, we know that for sure. The second thing is whether they prevent people to get infected totally, we don't know yet for sure. And the third one, whether they really will prevent you to infect somebody else, we also don't know. That will all become clear in the next months, because this is very rapidly developing. But basically what should happen is that countries should recognize the vaccines that have been used in other countries, because all the evidence is that these vaccines are all good vaccines. And when that can happen, and I hope that WHO can play an important role in that, and countries will actually, well, the United States will be part of WHO again. So I think it can happen. If that happens,
it is the responsibility of party leadership to convince its members of the party's direction. That's according to DAP National Organizing Secretary Anthony Loke, following Central Committee member Ronnie Liu's remark that the party should not degrade itself just to gain Malay support.
Loke said that if the leader fails to convince the party, he or she remain unconvinced, that person should be excluded from a leadership role as they can no longer represent the party. On Monday, Liu said DAP should not belittle or degrade itself just to gain Malay support, but instead safeguard its culture as well as its constitutional, pluralistic and democratic political struggle. His statement was immediately criticized by Segambut MP Hannah Yeoh, who said Liu has done a great disservice to many DAP leaders who are working hard to fight off prejudices and stigmas against the party. Damansara MP Tony Phua, meanwhile, also slammed Liu for saying Liu is the Chinese chauvinist that DAP does not need.
MRT Corp is considering private funding for the upcoming MRT3 Circle Line project in a bid to ease the government's burden. Its CEO, Datuk Muhammad Zarif Hashim, said the company is looking towards a hybrid model financing and aims to procure between 10 to 30% funding for the project. He said that as it stands, the government is fully prepared to fund the project, but they are giving an opportunity to MRT to come up with its own private funding proposal. It is estimated the cost of MRT3 will be at 20 to 30 billion ringgit, built over a period of 10 years. Tenders are scheduled to be opened in August this year. We'll take a short break. Stay with us.
Dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada Islam. This is orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita, sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Welcome back. The World Health Organization has called for a ban on the sale of live wild animals in food markets to prevent the emergence of new diseases. The WHO had earlier concluded in a joint study with China that the coronavirus was likely transmitted from bats to humans via a third animal.
According to the organization, wild animals are the source of more than 70% of all emerging infectious diseases in humans, many of which are caused by novel viruses. It added that while traditional markets are important for the livelihoods of many, banning the sale of live wild mammals could protect the health of market workers and shoppers alike. Some of the earliest known cases of COVID-19 had a link to a wholesale traditional food market in Wuhan, China, with many of the initial patients being stall owners, market employees, or regular visitors to the market.
World Bank and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, have urged for countries with excess COVID-19 vaccines to release them as soon as possible. This is on the back of challenges faced by developing countries in acquiring and deploying COVID-19 vaccines to their citizens.
World Bank President David Malpass and Jose Manuel Barroso, chair of the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, discussed the need for more transparency by countries, suppliers and development partners on vaccine contracts, national export and supply commitments and requirements. On Monday, the bank said it had committed $1.7 billion of $12 billion that it has made available for vaccine development, distribution and production in low and middle income countries, with around $4 billion expected to be approved by mid-year. With emergence of new variants, public health officials have warned that the world could lose its fight against the virus due to the slow pace of vaccinations in developing nations.
Hong Kong is planning to only allow those who have been vaccinated against COVID-19 to travel to Singapore. Now, this is part of a push to get more of its population vaccinated once both governments finalize a travel bubble. Chief Executive Carrie Lam said the move aims to provide incentives to encourage Hong Kong citizens to get vaccinated.
We are proposing to the Singaporean government that we would like our Hong Kong travellers to be fully vaccinated before they take on this air travel bubble. So this is our suggestion to the Singaporean government, which of course they have no objection. It's actually enhanced safety. But they will not impose such a requirement on travellers from Hong Kong within this air travel bubble.
Originally slated to start in November, the travel bubble between the two financial hubs was shelved days before it was due to start after a spike in COVID-19 cases in Hong Kong. It was postponed again in December and has since been on hold. The Japanese government has agreed to a controversial plan to release over 1 million tons of contaminated water from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant back into the ocean. China, South Korea and Taiwan have expressed opposition to the move. The decision is also expected to anger environmental groups and the fishing industry.
The work to release the treated water will begin in about 2 years and is expected to take decades to complete. China has described Japan's plan as extremely irresponsible and damaging to public health. Japan's government, meanwhile, argued that the release will be safe because the water has been processed to remove almost all radioactive elements and will be diluted. Reactor buildings at the Fukushima power plant were damaged by hydrogen explosions caused by an earthquake and tsunami in 2011, knocking out the reactor's cooling systems. More than 1 million tons of water have been used to cool the melted reactors.
New Zealand has become the first country to introduce a law that will require banks, insurers and investment managers to report the impacts of climate change on their business. The bill requires financial firms to explain how they would manage climate-related risks and opportunities.
Minister for Climate Change James Shaw said in a tweet that they cannot address the climate crisis unless banks allocate money in a way that assists the transition to net zero carbon emissions. Around 200 of the country's biggest companies will come under the legislation. The bill is expected to receive its first reading this week.
Southeast Asia's most valuable startup, Grab, will list in the US via a merger with Altimeter Growth, a special-purpose acquisition company. This is said to be the largest ever deal of its kind and is expected to value the group at above $40 billion. The combined company expects its securities to be traded on Nasdaq under the symbol GRAB in the coming months. GRAB expects to raise about $4.5 billion in cash proceeds from the transaction. This includes more than $4 billion from investors, including from BlackRock and Fidelity International, as part of the biggest U.S. equity offering by a Southeast Asian company. Was Foreign Minister's Big Brother remark a major diplomatic faux pas, or were his critics overreacting? Tonight on Consider This, we ask analysts on why it created such an uproar and the dynamics reshaping our policy towards China. That is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro AWANI app. I'm Cynthia Ng. We'll see you tomorrow.